Everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. It's a viral theory that's catching fire right now, with seekers and skeptics alike. We're going to take an ancient theological paradox, something people have argued about for centuries, and reframe it entirely through a modern lens. We're talking physics, frequency, and biological limitations. It's a total paradigm shift. We are moving the conversation away from pure mysticism and straight into the language of mechanics and energy.
So, here's the absolute core of the dilemma. Think about it purely as an engineering problem. If you've got this infinite, pure, high-vibration energy source, and you try to channel that directly through a fragile, finite human shell, how does that physical hardware not just completely shatter? Like, how does the human body manage that kind of intense biological heat signature without burning out?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our agenda for today. 1. The hypostatic union paradox. 2. The physics of friction. 3. Mechanics of a miracle. 4. Faith, doubt, and frequency. And 5. Modeling the Christ frequency.
All right, Section 1, the hypostatic union paradox, reconciling divinity and humanity.
To really grasp this theory, we've got to look at the foundational premise, reconciling a being that's traditionally understood as being 100% God and 100% man at the exact same time. For centuries, theology has called this the hypostatic union. And, it's usually presented as this deep mystery that you just sort of have to accept on faith. But this new frequency theory, it translates that paradox into a functional relationship. It asks us to visualize this not as some philosophical riddle, but as a literal vibrational interaction. You've got an infinite, high-vibration source actively attempting to communicate and operate through a finite, entropic receiver.
To see exactly how this plays out, the source material points us directly to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. Picture this. There's a massive, pressing crowd, and a bleeding woman reaches out and touches Jesus' cloak. Immediately, a transfer of power, or what the Greek calls dunamis, leaves him, and his immediate reaction is to stop everything and ask, "Who touched me?"
And this brilliantly illustrates the dividing line of this entire theory. Now, traditional theology usually leans toward option 1, that he obviously already knew who touched him, and asking the question was just a theatrical teaching moment for the crowd. But this frequency theory strictly leans into option 2, that this was a genuine limitation in physical perception. It posits that he engaged in voluntary limitation. Basically, he actively chose to restrict his innate omniscience. He voluntarily tuned his vessel down to human bandwidth so he could fully embody the human experience. He genuinely didn't know who touched him because he was operating strictly within our biological limits.
Moving right along to Section 2, the physics of friction, the biological heat signature.
So how does this actually translate into the physical world? Well, if you're tuning infinite power down to our finite human bandwidth, that's going to cause some serious wear and tear on the hardware, a sort of hypostatic friction. The source refers to this as the catalog of limitations. We're talking about extreme hunger in the wilderness, intense thirst on the cross, or just falling asleep from pure exhaustion during a violent storm. According to this framework, these aren't just quaint little stories to make him seem more relatable to us. No, they are strict evidence grounding his hardware in biological reality. Channeling divine signals causes a literal drainage of energy. Even the divine had to eat and sleep to sustain the hardware, because cellular energy frequencies require constant replenishment.
Which brings us to a really critical concept: biological entropy. Basically, to be human is to be entropic, right? It's the inevitable decay, the energy drainage, and the overall fragility that defines our physical state. By choosing this specific hardware, the infinite became totally bound by spatial and temporal limits. Maintaining that massive high-energy flow inside an entropic vessel required constant biological maintenance. It created what the theory literally calls a biological heat signature.
And this doesn't just apply to the body, it completely applies to the mind too. The text mentioned that Jesus grew in wisdom. But wait, if you're already omniscient, how exactly do you grow in wisdom? Well, the theory explains that learning, inside this physical framework, is a frequency calibration over time. It is not an instant data download. Just like he had to ask how many loaves of bread people had, or admitted he didn't know the exact hour of the end times, he operated through experiential knowing, not some unrestricted innate omniscience while in the flesh.
Now, this calibration process, it definitely wasn't easy. The book of Hebrews actually says he learned obedience through suffering. In the context of this frequency theory, suffering isn't viewed as a punishment or a flaw in the system. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a frequency of high-resistance friction. And what does friction do? It polishes. Suffering is seen here as the necessary friction that polishes the soul's receiver, refining that human hardware so it can better align with and process those much higher divine frequencies.
All right, on to Section 3, Mechanics of a Miracle, Resonant Energy Transfers.
So the crucial point is, if the hardware is limited and constantly needs this calibration, how do these extraordinary miracles actually happen? Well, under this framework, miracles aren't magic. They are completely mechanical, resonant energy transfers. Here is the equation. Step 1 is the divine command. Step 2 requires absolute belief from the recipient. When those two elements meet, they hit Step 3, a resonance peak, where the fields perfectly align. Only then do you get Step 4, the actual transfer of vibrational energy, that dunamis, which results in the miracle.
Section 4 is up next. Faith, doubt, and frequency, the modulators of power.
Now this introduces a totally massive variable into the entire equation, and that's us. If a miracle literally requires a resonance peak between the source and the receiver, then human mindset plays a physical, functional role in the circuit. The theory categorizes faith and doubt not just as emotional states, but as actual frequency modulators. Faith acts as a high-frequency bridge. It builds the environment that allows the healing vibration to be drawn out, actively amplifying the flow. Doubt, or unbelief, it is the exact opposite. It acts as a frequency dampener that actively blocks the power. The source material points out that Jesus literally could not perform many miracles in his hometown. It wasn't that he was just offended and chose not to. The collective low resonance of that environment acted as a functional restriction. The signal was literally dampened.
Finally, Section 5, Modeling the Christ Frequency, the Path to Mastery.
So you might be thinking, if this human vessel is so fragile, so entropic, and so incredibly susceptible to being dampened by doubt, why even choose to operate inside it in the first place? Well, according to the source, this is the ultimate purpose. He voluntarily tuned his vessel to human bandwidth, subjecting himself to hunger, exhaustion, all of it, to prove that spiritual mastery is possible from within the human biological framework. He didn't just hover above our limits, he got down and operated directly inside them. The whole point was to model ascension and prove that yes, our fragile human hardware can actually be calibrated to handle the infinite.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific benchmark, 963 Hz. In the realm of this viral theory, this is identified as the Christ frequency. It's considered the absolute benchmark divine signal. It represents the ultimate target state of resonance for our own internal receiver transmitters.
Which ultimately leaves us with this incredibly profound realization. This whole theory completely reframes the divine experience from something you just sort of observe from afar to a frequency that you can literally tune into. It suggests that permanent alignment isn't just some mystical myth, it's a mechanical possibility. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If our human hardware is fragile, but the frequency available to us is absolutely infinite, are you ready to calibrate your own receiver? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.